The moment on Staggered Night was alive with lights and applause. Hollywood gathered once again for an award ceremony that promised glamour, speeches, and shining moments. But no one in the audience expected that one simple act would turn the night into a memory that would shake millions across the world. Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage with his usual calm grace. He carried himself with humility, never rushing, never demanding the spotlight. The crowd erupted with cheers, but he stayed modest, bowing slightly, smiling softly, as if he were grateful, but never proud. That was the man people had always loved, kind, respectful, yet always holding a part of himself back. A few moments later, Sandra Bullock joined him. Her presence lit the room, her smile warm, her energy bright. The two of them had shared a bond since the days they first worked together, a bond fans had cherished for decades. When they stood side by side, the applause grew louder. But the moment that followed was not one of glamour, it was one of raw humanity. As Sandra began her speech, her voice trembled. She spoke of resilience, of how people in the industry often wore masks while fighting silent battles. She spoke of kindness, of how small acts could change lives. Then, in the middle of her words, her voice cracked. She tried to continue, but her eyes filled with tears. In front of thousands in the hall and millions watching around the world, Sandra Bullock's tears fell quietly down her face. The hall grew silent. The audience leaned forward, unsure of what to do. The cameras focused on her, capturing every drop of emotion, and then Keanu moved out without hesitation. He stepped toward her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. His touch was not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for her. He whispered something softly, words no microphone could catch. Whatever he said made her nod, her tears slowing as she leaned closer for strength. The silence in the hall turned into thunderous applause, not because of fame, but because of humanity. People saw not a staged performance, but two souls sharing a moment of truth. But for Keanu, it was more than a public gesture. It was a crack in the silence he had carried for so many years. As he looked at Sandra's tear-stained face, something inside him shifted. He had spent decades hiding behind walls of grief and loss, always giving but never allowing himself to truly receive. In that moment, holding her steady, he felt a part of those walls crumble. When the applause quieted, Sandra continued her speech, her voice still trembling, but stronger now with his support. The audience wiped their own eyes, moved by the unplanned tenderness. Later, when they stepped off the stage, Sandra turned to him. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Thank you, Keanu. I don't think I could have finished without you." He gave a small smile, but inside his chest, his heart was restless. It was not just her tears that had shaken him, it was what they had awoken in him. As the night continued with laughter and music, Keanu sat quietly at his table, replaying the moment in his mind. Her tears had not only touched the audience, they had broken something inside him that had been locked for decades. The world saw a kind act, a beautiful moment between two friends. But Keanu knew it was more. It was the beginning of something he could no longer run from. Asterisk the world reacts. Morning after the award ceremony, the world could not stop talking. Newspapers, websites, and social media were filled with the same images: Sandra Bullock's tears falling on stage, and Keanu Reeves stepping forward to comfort her. People called it the most genuine moment of the night. Some said it was proof of a friendship stronger than fame. Others whispered it was something deeper, something the cameras had only caught a glimpse of. Keanu sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through the headlines. He saw words like "the hug that healed" and "Keanu's quiet strength." He sighed softly. The world saw a gesture, but for him, it was far more personal. He had always lived quietly, guarding his heart, carrying grief in silence. Yet when he placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered those words, it wasn't just to calm her, it was to remind himself that he was still capable of reaching out, of staying present in someone else's pain. Later that day, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra. "Thank you again. Can we meet? Just us?" He hesitated. Part of him feared that the world's eyes were too sharp now, that meeting her would only invite more noise. But another part of him, the part touched by her tears, told him to go. They met at a quiet cafe tucked into a hidden corner of the city. Sandra was already there, sitting by the window, her face calm, but her eyes carrying the same heaviness from the night before. When Keanu walked in, she smiled faintly. "You came." He sat across from her, his voice soft. "You asked." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the world's reaction pressing between them. Then Sandra spoke, her voice trembling. I don't know why it happened. I was fine before the speech, but when I looked out at the audience, I felt this wave crash over me. I thought I would break. And then, you were there. Keanu listened, his eyes steady, his tone low. Sometimes we don't choose the moments that break us, but we can choose how we face them. You were brave, Sandra. She shook her head, her eyes glistening again. I wasn't brave. I almost ran off that stage. The only reason I stayed was because of you. When you whispered those words, it felt like the ground stopped shaking under me. Keanu's chest tightened. He had whispered 3 simple words. I'm right here. He hadn't thought much about them in the moment, but now he realized they had carried more meaning than he knew. The cafe was quiet, but soon, whispers began. A few people recognized them. Phones lifted discreetly, cameras clicked softly. Keanu noticed, his instinct to retreat rising fast, but Sandra reached across the table, her hand gently touching his. Don't leave, Keanu. Not this time. The words froze him. They were the same tone she had used on stage, a plea hidden beneath strength. His heart trembled. For decades, he had walked away whenever the world came too close, whenever feelings grew too heavy. Silence had been his escape. But now, sitting across from her, her hand holding his, he realized he could not keep running forever. The world might twist their story. The headlines might chase them, but in that moment, all he saw was her dot, and for the first time in years, he stayed seated. The weight of the spotlight's quiet cafe moment spread faster than either of them expected. By the next morning, photographs of Keanu and Sandra holding hands were everywhere. Headlines screamed, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, more than friends? Some called it the love story Hollywood had been waiting for. Others criticized it, claiming it was staged out for Keanu. The noise felt overwhelming. He had always been private, careful, and deeply protective of the parts of himself the world could never see. Now, those parts were being dragged into the open. He stayed in his home that day, pacing the floor, fighting with his own thoughts. Silence had always been his safe place, but now silence felt heavier than ever. His phone buzzed again. It was Sandra. Her message was short. Don't let the world decide for us. Come see me. He hesitated, fear crawling inside his chest, but something stronger pushed him forward. He grabbed his jacket and drove through the streets, headlights glowing against the night. When he arrived at her house, Sandra opened the door with a soft smile. She looked tired, her eyes carrying the same weight his did, but she also looked relieved to see him dot inside. They sat together in the living room, no cameras, no lights, only the stillness of the night. Sandra was the first to speak. Keanu, I know you don't like the spotlight. I don't either. But what happened on stage? What happened at the cafe? It wasn't for them. It was for us. It was real. He lowered his head, his voice quiet. I don't know if I know how to do this, Sandra. Every time I let someone in, I lose them. Silence was the only way I survived. She moved closer, her tone soft but steady. Silence may have kept you alive, but it hasn't let you live. You don't have to carry the weight alone anymore. Let someone stand with you. Her words pressed deep into his guarded heart. He wanted to believe them, but fear still chained him. He whispered, almost broken, what if I can't protect you from the noise, from the pressure, from the world? Sandra's eyes glistened, but her voice was firm. Then don't try to protect me. Just be with me. That's enough. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was healing. For once, Keanu didn't feel the urge to escape, but the peace didn't last long. A sudden knock at the door broke the stillness. Sandra opened it, only to find the reporters outside, cameras already raised. Questions flew fast. Are you and Keanu together? Is this the love story of the year? Flashes filled the room. Before she could shut the door, Keanu stood frozen, fear gripping him again. This was exactly why he stayed hidden for so long. The world didn't care about the truth, only about the story they could sell. He turned away, his chest heavy, the old instinct rising, to walk out, to disappear, to retreat into silence again. But then Sandra's voice stopped him. Keanu, don't leave me. Not now. He turned back slowly, his eyes meeting hers. Her words were not a command, not a demand, but a plea filled with trust. And for the first time in decades, he fought against the urge to run. The breaking point reporters outside Sandra's home didn't leave. Their voices echoed through the night, their cameras flashing like lightning. Sandra closed the curtains, shutting out the light, but the noise still pressed against the walls. Keanu sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clenched, his chest heavy. The urge to leave was almost unbearable. For years, he had survived by disappearing when things became too loud. But now, with Sandra's eyes on him, with her voice still echoing, "Don't leave me," he felt torn into dust. Sandra sat beside him. Her hand rested gently on his, steadying him. "Keanu, I know this is hard. I know you hate the spotlight. But this moment, it isn't about them. It's about us. If you walk out now, you're not just leaving the reporters behind, you're leaving me too." Her words pierced him. He turned toward her, his voice low and broken. "Sandra, I don't know if I have the strength. I've spent 30 years carrying silence because it was safer. Every time I loved, I lost. Every time I opened my heart, it shattered. I don't know if I can survive that again." Her eyes glistened, but her voice did not shake. "You survived before, Keanu. Not because you stayed silent, but because you kept kindness alive. You are stronger than your fear. But you don't have to be strong alone. Let me stand with you." His chest ached. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not demanding, not pulling, just standing beside him, asking him to trust. The silence between them grew thick. But it wasn't the silence he had carried all his life. It was different. It was filled with possibility. Finally, he whispered, "What if the world destroys this before it even begins?" Sandra leaned closer, her hand tightening on his. "Then let the world talk. They don't get to decide what's real. We do." For a long moment, Keanu just stared at her, his heart trembling. The world outside shouted questions, but all he heard was her voice. And then something shifted. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains back. Flashes erupted instantly, cameras snapping, reporters shouting his name. Sandra gasped softly, but Keanu didn't move away. For the first time, he didn't hide. He turned his head slightly toward her, his voice calm but steady. "I'm tired of running." She stepped beside him, her hand sliding into his. The flashes grew brighter, but he didn't flinch. The reporters outside shouted louder, but Keanu's voice rose just enough to be heard through the glass. "We're not here to give you headlines. We're just a people trying to live. Respect that." For a moment, the crowd outside froze, stunned by his words. Sandra squeezed his hand gently. "You stayed." Keanu looked at her, his guarded heart trembling but open. "For the first time in years, I stayed." The breaking point had arrived, and instead of retreating into silence, he had chosen to remain. The words he never planned to see. Pictures from Sandra's home spread across the world in hours. Keanu Reeves standing by the window, holding Sandra Bullock's hand. Flashes bursting outside, it became the image everyone was talking about. Social media flooded with messages. Fans praised him for showing strength. Others questioned what it meant. But for Keanu, it was not about headlines. It was about the choice he had made to stay. A few days later, both of them were scheduled to appear at a charity gala. Reporters filled the hall, waiting for them. Keanu felt the familiar pressure rise in his chest as he walked in, Sandra by his side. His instinct told him to stay silent, to smile politely and say nothing. But as the event began, something inside him shifted again. He saw children on stage, families who had come to share stories of hardship and resilience. Their honesty stirred something in him. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward slowly. The crowd grew quiet. Cameras pointed at him, waiting. He gripped the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. His voice began low, uncertain. "Most of my life, I've tried to live quietly. I thought silence was strength. I thought if I didn't speak about my pain, if I didn't open my heart, I could protect myself." The hall was silent, the audience leaning forward, hanging on his words. He took a breath, his eyes flicking toward Sandra. She stood just a few feet away, her eyes steady, encouraging. "But I've learned something," he continued, his voice firmer now. "Silence doesn't protect you. It only keeps you alone. Someone reminded me of that when I was ready to walk away. She told me, 'Don't leave.' And for the first time in 30 years, I listened." The room gasped. Whispers spread quickly, but no one interrupted. Keanu's eyes softened, his voice breaking. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know what the world will say. But I know this: I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding behind silence. Tonight, I choose to stay." Applause erupted, louder than he had ever heard before. Some people in the crowd wiped their eyes. Others stood, clapping with respect, not for a movie star, but for a man who had finally spoken from his heart. Keanu stepped back, lowering the microphone. His chest trembled, But it was not from fear. It was from release. Sandra joined him, her hand slipping into his again. She whispered softly, "You did it." He looked at her, a faint smile breaking through. "No, we did it." Outside, the world waited with cameras, ready to spin the moment into a story. But for Keanu, it no longer mattered what they wrote. What mattered was the truth. He had spoken. He had stayed. And he had chosen not to let fear control him anymore. That night, as he left the gala with Sandra beside him, he felt lighter than he had in decades. His silence had broken. His heart had finally spoken. Asterisk the moment the world will never forget. Morning after the charity gala, the world was shaken. News outlets replayed Keanu's speech over and over. Millions of people watched him admit what he had hidden for 30 years. That silence was not strength, but loneliness. Headlines called it the most human moment in Hollywood. Fans around the world sent messages of love, respect, and gratitude. People who had carried their own pain said his words gave them courage to face it. But for Keanu, it wasn't about the headlines or the applause. It was about what came after. That evening, he sat with Sandra in her backyard, away from the lights, away from the noise. They looked up at the stars in silence, but this time, it was not the heavy silence of grief. It was peaceful, alive, filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sandra turned to him, her voice soft. "Do you realize what you did last night? You gave people a gift. You gave them honesty." Keanu shook his head gently. "I wasn't trying to give the world anything. I was just finally telling the truth. For the first time, I didn't walk away." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "And that's why it mattered. Because you stayed." His chest tightened, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something warmer. He realized he didn't just stay for the crowd, or even for her. He stayed for himself. Days later, they appeared together at another public event. This time, they walked in hand. The crowd gasped, cameras flashed, and voices shouted questions. But Keanu didn't flinch. He stepped forward with Sandra beside him, his voice calm but steady. "The world has seen us in a moment of truth. I don't have answers for the future, but I know this: I will not run anymore. I will not live in silence anymore. I will stay, and I will live." The hall erupted in applause. Some people cried, others clapped until their hands hurt. It was not just admiration for a star, it was respect for a man who had chosen vulnerability over silence. As he left the stage, Sandra leaned in and whispered, "You realize you just stunned millions again, right?" He gave a quiet smile, his eyes soft. "I wasn't trying to. I just told them the truth." Later that night, as the city lights flickered below, Keanu and Sandra sat together in the stillness. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. For once, he didn't fear the silence. He welcomed it. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Your tears broke my silence. And because of that, I found my voice again." Sandra squeezed his hand gently, her voice tender. And the world heard it. The night carried on, quiet and calm. But the moment would never fade from Hollywood, from the millions who watched, and most of all, from Keanu's heart.